Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Natalia Aguilar, and today I'm going to be presenting to you the research that I did for my bachelor thesis. This paper it's called Rape, Unrest, and Rational Choice, a cross-national analysis of wartime rape and natural disasters. And I'm basically going to be explaining how natural disasters impact dynamics of conflict-related rape. Well, first of all, what's the relationship between natural disasters and rape? Well, evidence shows that in the aftermath of natural disasters, interpersonal rape, which is rape among civilians, tends to increase. There's evidence of this phenomena from several case studies, such as from New Zealand, Sri Lanka, Honduras, Nicaragua, and the US and Canada. And there are different scholars that try to explain why this happened. For instance, Fisher argues that men tend to ventilate their anger and frustration through committing rape. In addition to that, the lack of police and security enforcement after natural disasters make it easier for people to engage in rape. In some instances, the fact that people are relocated to temporary accommodation camps makes also rape more likely to happen due to the living conditions. And finally, in some cases, such as post-earthquake Haiti, some humanitarian officers had abused their powers and made girls trade sex in exchange of food. However, there is not that much research looking into how natural disasters impact conflict-related rape. And this is when my research started in order to investigate this question. Since I wanted to investigate wartime rape, I decided to go into foundational theories in the topic. Well, initially, I considered static models such as feminist rape theory or strategic rape theory. However, because there is not enough empirical evidence supporting these approaches, I decided to look into more behavioral models that look at micro level interactions, so more at like dynamics within rebel groups and combatant behavior. In this case, my research mainly relies on Cohen's combatant socialization theory. Regarding conflict-related rape, we start with the assumption that rape is not strategically interesting for armed group leaders. And the reason for this is that rape can bring a lot of cost to armed groups. For instance, it can bring reputational cost, losing then domestic or international support. It can also bring health risks to the soldiers by sexually transmitted diseases. And it's also quite time-consuming in terms of targeting civilians compared to other forms of violence. So Cohen, in her theory, she argues that groups where combatants are coerced to join are more likely to engage in wartime rape. Why is this? Well, she argues that when there is coercive agreement in a group, there is no social bonds among the soldiers. Therefore, gang rape is understood as a socialization tool that increases group cohesion. Whereas in group where recruitment is voluntarily, people already have common traits such as same ethnicity or same religion, which is why they join the group in the first place. Therefore, there is a stronger group cohesion, and then there is less likelihood to rape being committed by combatants. Well, looking into the relationship between natural disasters and conflict, this paper also relies on the assumption that disasters do not necessarily lead to intensification of conflict. Why is this? Well, first of all, combatants and armed groups rely heavily on civilians for food and for shelter. However, in the aftermath of a natural disaster, civilians may not be able to keep providing this support anymore. Therefore, armed groups may start shifting their interest into survival as a group rather than on recruitment or rather than intensifying the conflict. Supporting this evidence, Sletterbach proposes a disaster sociology that argues that shared trauma caused by the natural disaster creates a feeling of solidarity and commonality among survivors, which binds them together, creating a sort of community of sufferers, and in turn, this leads into less violence. So in this visual representation, I wanted to show how I tried to bring these two approaches together, both the theories on conflict-related rape that I use and the disaster sociology. And well, I argue that groups with a strong social cohesion will be less likely to commit wartime rape, while groups with weak social cohesion will be more likely to commit wartime rape. Therefore, armed groups with weak social cohesion who endure a natural disaster will change their way of behaving and will start well, first of all, feelings of solidarity will emerge among combatants, and second, the group will be consistently weakened by the natural disaster. Therefore, this group will be less likely to commit wartime rape. Now, the hypothesis of this research is that natural disasters decrease the likelihood of wartime rape in intrastate conflicts. Well, in order to explore this question, I decided to do a cross-national analysis on 179 countries from 1989 to 2015. The aim of this research is to explore the extent to which conflict predicts the likelihood of rape through the conditional effect of natural disasters. The data is taken from three sources: the UCDP Battle-Related Deaths dataset, SPAC 2.0, and MDAT. The independent variable is a count variable of wartime rape. Sorry, that's the dependent variable. The independent variable is a dummy variable of conflict, which is created by recoding battle-related deaths. The conditional effect is created by an interaction effect between conflict and natural disasters, which are disaggregated by type, as I will show in the next slide. As control variables, I went back to the existing literature and I used the most widely used, which are population, urban share, GDP per capita, democracy, and fertility rate. And I decided to run a negative binomial regression since my dependent variable violated the assumptions necessary for an OLS regression. Finally, in order to support my arguments, I also conducted a small qualitative case study on the 2004 tsunami in Aceh, Indonesia. Well, looking at the results obtained from the negative binomial regression, first, we can see how natural disasters are disaggregated by type. There is droughts, earthquakes, epidemics, extreme temperatures, floods, landslides, and storms. The evidence supports our hypothesis in all of the models except for epidemics. And in 4 of these models, there is a significant and negative relationship, which indeed supports the fact that conflict predicts a decrease in the likelihood of wartime rape through the conditional effect of natural disasters. Looking into the case study, the conflict that was under question here was the one between the Indonesian government against the separatist group GAM. This conflict started in 1976 and it continued until 2005. The conflict intensified substantially from the 1990s, and in 1990 there were 250,000 displaced civilians. However, in the aftermath of the tsunami, this research shows that the approach that soldiers had shifted completely. Suddenly, people started rethinking their reasons for fighting, and this ended in a cease of fire. And in 2005, a peace agreement was signed. On top of that, it is important to note that the disaster disproportionately affected the separatist group, which was severely damaged and severely weakened by this tsunami. While there is no direct reference in the in the interviews that were conducted with former gang members about sexual violence and whether after the disaster they decided to stop raping for any reason or another, evidence shows that cases of wartime rape decreased substantially after the natural disaster, in line with the ceasefire and with the peace agreement. Conclusions of this research. Well, first, the findings of this paper challenge common assumptions on the impact of natural disasters on conflict-related rape, which traditionally would assume that natural disasters would result in increased levels of wartime rape. And second, this paper suggests that disasters may be expected to decrease the risk of conflict-related rape by altering the behavior of combatants. Yet, I'd like to add on a personal note that while these are the results of my paper, by no means it means that natural disasters would definitely predict the likelihood of wartime rape. And regardless of these results, it's also important to know that natural disaster can have devastating consequences into populations. And this is still an issue that's very much relevant to keep looking into and keep studying.